You're in the room. You're trying, really trying, laughing at the right moments, asking good questions, giving them your full, undivided attention. And somewhere across that same room, someone else is doing almost nothing. Standing quietly, saying maybe 10 words all night, and every eye keeps drifting toward them anyway, pulled by something you can't quite name, while you sit there fully present and somehow still invisible. You've felt this before, not just in that room, but everywhere rooms like it exist. In group chats where your longest message gets a single thumbs up and their one-line joke gets 50 replies. In relationships where you show up every time, remember every detail, and somehow still feel like the one working hardest just to be remembered back. You gave more. You said more. You tried harder by every visible measure, and none of it mattered, because trying harder was never actually the thing that made someone unforgettable. There's a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with charisma, looks, or luck. It has everything to do with a mechanism most people never learn to use on purpose, a quiet, deliberate incompleteness that pulls attention toward it instead of chasing attention down. You're about to learn exactly what it is and why almost nobody else ever will. You over-explain to be understood. Every joke gets a footnote in case it doesn't land. Every opinion gets 3 extra sentences of context just to make sure nobody walks away with the wrong impression of you. You lay yourself out completely, thinking clarity is what makes someone worth remembering, when all it actually does is leave nothing left to wonder about. You stay available to be chosen. You answer fast every time because showing up instantly feels like proof of how much you care, how reliable you are, how easy you'd be to pick. You clear your schedule for maybes. You reply before the message has even finished loading on their end. And somehow, being that reachable has never once made you feel more wanted, just easier to take for granted, precisely because there was never a moment where you weren't there. And you fill every silence to avoid being forgotten. A pause opens up in a conversation and your instinct is to rush in, say something, anything, before the quiet stretches too long and someone's attention wanders somewhere else. You've treated silence like a threat instead of a tool, something to be defeated the instant it appears, never once considering that the silence itself might have been doing more work than your words ever could. Here's what all 3 have actually been costing you. Not just energy, though they cost you plenty of that, explaining and rushing and filling every gap you were ever handed. They've cost you the exact thing you were chasing. Every full explanation removed a question someone might have carried with them. Every instant reply proved you had nothing better waiting. Every silence you rushed to fill was a silence that could have worked in your favor. Left alone, you haven't been making yourself easier to remember. You've been making yourself easier to overlook, one complete, available, filled-in moment at a time. And it's about to become obvious exactly why. Here's the forbidden truth nobody around you will say out loud. Presence was never built by being fully known. It's built by staying incomplete. In the 1920s, the psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something strange happen. In a busy Vienna cafe, waiters could recall the exact details of orders that hadn't been paid yet, down to the smallest specifics, and then forget those same orders completely the instant the bill was settled. She took that observation into the lab and confirmed it. Unfinished tasks lodge themselves in memory with a persistence that finished ones simply don't have. The mind keeps working on what hasn't been resolved. It lets go almost immediately of what has. That's not just true of tasks. It's true of people. Someone fully explained, fully available, fully resolved in another person's mind gets filed away and forgotten, the same way a paid bill disappears from a waiter's memory. Someone left slightly unfinished, a sentence that trailed off, a silence that wasn't explained, a side of themselves that was never quite shown stays open. Unresolved. Occupying space the mind can't quite close the file on. That's not a trick or a manipulation. It's simply how attention actually works, and almost nobody uses it on purpose. Once you see it, the question stops being, how do I explain myself better, and becomes something far more useful. What am I willing to leave unfinished on purpose? You are not the first mind to notice that presence works this way, and you're certainly not the first to weaponize it deliberately. 25 centuries ago, the strategist Sun Tzu wrote about a form of command that had nothing to do with force, volume, or direct confrontation. In the spirit of Sun Tzu, The supreme skill lies in subduing influence without ever needing to clash head-on for it, in shaping the field so completely that the outcome is already decided before a single direct move is made. He wasn't writing about parties, group chats, or first dates, but the mechanism he described, restraint as command, unpredictability as strength, translates perfectly into a room full of people deciding, without even realizing they're deciding it, who's worth paying attention to. This isn't modern game playing dressed up as ancient wisdom. It's a 2,500-year-old battle-tested principle, and the version of you filling every silence tonight is proof that most people still haven't learned it. Let's start with the pattern sitting underneath almost every forgettable moment you've ever had. Leaving something genuinely unfinished creates more mental residue than fully explaining yourself ever could. Not a withheld secret. Not a manipulative tease designed to bait a reaction. A real, honest incompleteness. A story with no tidy ending. A thought that trails off because it genuinely hasn't resolved yet. That kind of unfinished thing does something a complete explanation never can. It keeps working on someone after you've already left the room. The average mind overshares to be understood, laying out every detail, every motive, every footnote, convinced that being fully known is what makes someone worth remembering. It isn't. A fully explained story gets filed away, closed, done, the moment the last sentence lands. The disciplined mind does something almost uncomfortable by comparison. It leaves just enough unsaid, not out of coyness, but out of honesty about what actually hasn't resolved yet, and lets that incompleteness sit in someone else's mind, unclosed, exactly where it has every right to be. Imagine trailing off mid-sentence, mid-thought, something real and slightly unresolved, and that's actually the reason I don't really talk about, and then just letting it stop there. Not as a performance, but because it genuinely wasn't ready to be finished. Days later, that half sentence is still being replayed. Not because it was dramatic, because it was open. The mind can't help circling back to a door that was never actually closed. Here's the line worth remembering. A story fully told is a door fully closed, and nobody stands in front of closed doors wondering what's behind them. Weak minds explain everything to feel understood in the moment. Strong minds leave the true unfinished parts unfinished and let someone else's mind do the returning for them. Drop "I leave it open" in the comments if you've ever caught yourself replaying someone's unfinished sentence for far longer than you expected to. Once you start leaving things honestly unfinished, you'll notice something else working against you just as quietly: how completely predictable your presence has been. Unpredictable presence creates a stronger pull than constant availability ever could, and there's a well-documented reason why. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement. Rewards delivered on an uneven, unpredictable schedule create a far stronger behavioral pull than rewards delivered every single time, right on cue. A slot machine doesn't pay out constantly. That's exactly what makes it so hard to walk away from. The average mind responds instantly every time, convinced that speed proves reliability, that being reachable within seconds is what makes someone feel valued. It isn't. Constant, predictable availability gets absorbed almost instantly into the background, expected rather than appreciated. The emotional equivalent of a light switch nobody thinks twice about flipping. The disciplined mind lets timing stay uneven on purpose. Not cold, not games, just genuinely variable. Responding warmly when it's warranted and letting a beat pass when it isn't, without ever explaining the gap. Imagine a message answered warmly, fully, immediately, one day. And then, on another day, the exact same kind of message sits unanswered for hours, with no explanation offered and none owed. That inconsistency doesn't read as rejection. It reads as a person with a life, a rhythm, a presence that isn't sitting by the phone. The uncertainty itself becomes the pull, in exactly the way a guaranteed response never manages to be. Here's the line worth keeping. A reward you can predict stops feeling like a reward at all. Weak minds respond instantly every time, hoping speed will be mistaken for value. Strong minds let their timing stay honestly uneven, and let the uncertainty do work that certainty never could. Drop "I stopped being predictable" in the comments if you've ever noticed someone's presence pull harder the moment it stopped being guaranteed. There's a third pattern, and it lives in the exact moments you've spent your whole life trying to eliminate. Silence that carries no visible need reads as strength. Silence used to fish for reassurance, to bait a compliment, to pull someone into filling the gap for you, reads as exactly what it is. The silence itself was never the problem. What you were quietly asking it to do for you was. The average mind fills every quiet moment to seem engaged, terrified that a pause will be read as disinterest, boredom, or awkwardness. So it rushes in with a comment, a question, anything to keep the air moving. That instinct doesn't project engagement. It projects discomfort with stillness, and discomfort with stillness is its own kind of information, freely handed over to anyone paying attention. The disciplined mind does something far more difficult. It lets silence sit, comfortable and undemanding, asking nothing from the room, needing nothing back. Simply present the way a locked door is present, without knocking. Imagine a room going quiet mid-conversation, the kind of pause that usually gets nervously filled within 2 seconds. And instead, no one rushes to fix it. You don't rush to fix it. The quiet just exists for a moment, unbothered, and something shifts in how the room reads you. Not awkward. Unbothered by things that unsettle everyone else. That's a far rarer quality than anything you could have said to fill the gap. Here's the line worth remembering. Silence that needs nothing is the loudest thing in the room. Weak minds fill every pause to prove they're comfortable. Strong minds let the pause prove it for them, without saying a word. Drop. I let it sit in the comments if you've ever watched a silence do more for you than anything you could have said into it. There's a fourth pattern, and it might be the hardest one to actually do, because everything in you will resist it in the exact moment it matters most. Leaving while still wanted preserves the exact energy that staying too long quietly erodes. Not because more time together is bad, because energy has a peak, and almost nobody has ever been taught to notice it, let alone leave while they're standing on it. The average mind stays until the energy fades, squeezing every last minute out of a good conversation, a good night, a good moment, convinced that more is always better, and leaving early means leaving something on the table. But energy doesn't hold a plateau. It rises, peaks, and then slowly, imperceptibly, begins to soften, and staying through that softening is how a genuinely great hour quietly becomes a merely fine one by the time it actually ends. The disciplined mind does something that feels almost wrong the first time. It exits while the room still wants more, on purpose, while the energy is still rising instead of waiting for the signal that it's already started to fall. Imagine the conversation at its absolute best, real laughter, real connection, the kind of moment you'd normally try to stretch for another hour. And instead, you stand up. You say you have to go. Not because you want to leave, but because you know exactly what you're protecting by leaving now instead of later. The room doesn't forget that peak. It remembers exactly where the energy was when you walked out, because you never gave it the chance to watch that energy fade instead. Here's the line worth keeping. Nobody misses you while you're still in the room, only once you've left it at the right moment. Weak minds stay until the goodbye feels obvious. Strong minds leave while the room is still asking them to stay. Drop "I left at the peak" in the comments if you've ever walked away from a great moment on purpose, just to protect it. There's a fifth pattern, and it's the one tying every other pattern together, because it's the one built to never actually resolve. Staying permanently a little unknowable keeps a person occupying space in someone else's mind indefinitely. Not because you're hiding something dark, because you've decided deliberately that one part of you simply doesn't get handed over completely, no matter how close someone gets or how long they stay. The average mind tries to be fully understood to feel secure, convinced that being completely known is what makes a connection safe and permanent. It's the opposite. Full resolution is exactly what lets a mind close the file and move on to the next open question elsewhere. The disciplined mind protects one part of themselves that never gets fully explained, not a lie, not a wall, just a genuine, permanent edge of themselves that stays theirs alone, regardless of how much else gets shared. Imagine someone thinking about you months later, still turning over some detail they never quite got the full answer to, some contradiction that never resolved, some part of you they never got to see the bottom of. They're not confused. They're not owed a better explanation. They're simply still curious, in exactly the way the Zeigarnik effect predicted they would be, because the file was never closed, and files that never close don't get archived. They stay open indefinitely, taking up real space in a mind that's already forgotten 100 people who explain themselves completely. Here's the line that matters most out of everything you've heard tonight. The fully understood get forgotten, and the permanently unresolved get remembered. Weak minds hand over the last unanswered question just to feel closer to someone. Strong minds keep one door slightly open forever, and let that open door be the reason they're never quite finished being thought about. Drop "I keep one door open" in the comments if you've ever realized someone was still wondering about you long after you'd stopped wondering about them. So look at what you've actually been building this whole time. The half-told story you stopped rushing to finish, letting real incompleteness do work your explanations never could. The variable return, timing left honestly uneven instead of instantly predictable. The silence that asked nothing, sitting undemanding in a room instead of being filled out of fear. The room you learned to leave first, walking away while the energy was still rising instead of waiting for it to fade. And underneath all four, the fifth pattern tying them together, the one part of yourself you stopped handing over completely, keeping a door open that never quite gets the chance to close. 5 patterns, 1 identity. This was never about becoming colder, more distant, harder to reach. It was about refusing to hand over full resolution to people who hadn't actually earned it yet, and sometimes to people who never will. That's why your presence used to fade the moment you left a room, not because you weren't interesting, not because you weren't trying hard enough, but because you were handing over complete files to people who then had nothing left to do but close them and move on. And here's what happens the moment that finally changes for good. You stop over-explaining to be understood and let a few real things stay open instead. You stop being instantly available every time and let your presence carry the weight that predictability was quietly draining from it. You stop filling every silence out of fear and start letting it sit exactly as comfortably as you do. Weak minds keep wondering why they're forgotten the instant they leave a room. That's no longer your pattern. You've seen the mechanism now, the way Sun Tzu saw it 25 centuries ago, and a presence that never fully resolves is a presence that never actually leaves. So now you know. 5 patterns, and if you're honest with yourself, one of them probably landed harder than the rest, the story you keep finishing instead of leaving open, the reply you send instantly every single time, the silence you rush to fill, the room you stay in long after the energy peaked, or the last unanswered question you keep handing over just to feel closer to someone. Comment right now with which pattern you need most. Name it. Let it sit there in the comments, not as proof you were forgettable, but as the first real step toward making sure you never are again. If this video finally gave you language for something you've felt for years without being able to explain it, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell, because there's more waiting for minds sharp enough to stay permanently a little unresolved. You are never forgettable. You are never boring, never invisible, never the person people simply forgot to think about. You were just finishing every sentence for people who should have been left wondering, closing every file, answering every question, filling every silence, handing over complete resolution to people who hadn't earned it, and then wondering why they moved on so easily. The moment you start leaving the right things unfinished, presence stops fading the second you leave the room, because you were never fully in it to begin with. You were never forgettable. You were just finishing every sentence for people who should have been left wondering.